Hello and welcome. This is another episode of Conversations in Artificial Intelligence. This is Paolo, once again, is your host. And today we're going to have a very interesting conversation for all of those who really are interested to take an innovation, an artificial intelligence product or a process and take it really to market. Because that is something there's lots of challenges. And today, we have an expert. We have an expert in sales and marketing that really works in this field of AI and tries every day to take his startup to the next level, introducing their services and products to a number of executives in all North America. So with us today from Austin, Texas, we have Steve Meier. How are you, Steve?
Howdy from Austin, Texas. I'm doing well, Paolo. Thanks for having me.
So, welcome. Thank you so much. And, there was a point in my career where I was supposed to go to Texas, to Dallas, but I said no to that offer and I actually ended up in California. But there's a part of my mind is always kind of, not regrets, but I would have liked to, have a foray in Texas, see how it looks like, and, like sending all the pictures home to my family back.
It's plenty big. There's always room for more. Come down anytime.
Very, very good. So, Steve, let's, have our audience a little bit familiarized with yourself. So you have lots of experience in the marketing and sales realm, specifically around projects that have to do with analytics and machine learning and predictive analytics and so on. But if you were to introduce yourself back when you were in high school, not too long ago, it seems, you have, to make it simple for your friends and tell them, what you're doing. A couple of things that you tell them. Well, how would you, introduce yourself back then with your friends?
Well, I would probably not tell them everything. I'm going to censor some of this for you, Paulo, just to keep it light for the interview. But no, I would tell them, predominantly, I like to think of myself as a father first, a husband second, and a technologist third. I think they'd be surprised to find that I found myself in technology for so long, seeing that I've always fashioned myself as a teacher and spent a short time as a teacher. But I feel like I'm a technologist now, and I think that would surprise them a little bit.
That's that's very interesting. And started in Chicago. Tell us a little bit. How did you end up in Texas and in Austin, and how did you end up in technology?
Yeah, so careers come full circle a little bit, where I mentioned always going to be a teacher, and I spent 1 year as a high school history teacher, and that was in Chicago, and it was a tremendous experience. That's what I thought I always wanted to do, but I put myself through college in technology sales, and then I wanted to get the heck out of there and be a teacher, but when the economy turned in 2008, Illinois got hit pretty bad. So I and 14,000 other non-tenured teachers had to find other work. So I came to Austin for a few reasons. One, it was absolutely recession-proof, which is always a good thing for a young professional, but it's also a great tech city. So I knew if I came to Texas, I had some options, whether it be a teacher or get back into technology. And I actually found myself in a combination of the two in technology sales for education, working for the Art Institutes of Austin. I got recruited to a digital agency where I spent most of my professional career, almost 10 years, working in first business development, then marketing, then leading a strategy team. And while I was leading that consulting team, we actually, big claim to fame was we won the IBM Watson account by pitching them the use of Watson APIs, and they loved it. So I got a lot of at-bats trying to figure out how to creatively implement Watson APIs into different sales, marketings, and event solutions. So I guess I cut my teeth in AI that way, and then from there, became a co-founder of our startup now, Kungfu.AI, and now I feel like what I do now, I do sales and marketing and strategy, but at the end of the day, I'm an AI teacher. So I've come full circle. Here we are again, and I enjoy getting out there and sharing some of the things we see.
So very good, very good. So for our audience, you see how some casual events or even some economics events shape some very interesting connections here from the Midwest, the US Midwest, to being a teacher, to all of a sudden becoming a strategist and a technologist in Texas. And actually, I believe that this variety of experience is of extreme value, especially when it comes to communicate what a new device or a new product or a new service has to do to the general public, because that's one of the biggest challenges. Actually, when you have a new industry, it's one of the biggest challenges to communicate to the world what it is that the value is and why they should buy it or why they should use it. And so we learned about your discovery, basically, of finding a way to communicate the value of IBM Watson to IBM itself so that they become then a customer of yours. So in your work with Kungfu.AI, you face several situations like this. Tell us a little bit what's important to make managers understand the value of AI. How do you go about it?
It can be a tough conversation because I think that if we sat in 10 meetings, 8 people still haven't come to this realization that AI is actually going to be a significant component of their business. And for the ones that do come around to it, they've come to a fundamental realization, which I think really is a predecessor to wanting to embrace artificial intelligence. And it's really just valuing data as their asset. If they can see data as not only an asset to the business, but a method of just differentiating moving forward, that's a tremendous paradigm shift that a lot of businesses are still going through or need to go through to really be open-minded to the idea of artificial intelligence. And for the ones that do value data as an asset and they're open-minded to artificial intelligence, where they're at is more they see the data and they maybe are even investing in data science at a high level or even analytics and business intelligence, but they're not quite seeing the return. They have a lot of data, but they're looking for better measurable impact. So for the ones that have the data and value the data and want to see more return, they're the ones that are probably our best customer and really the ones that are most ready to embrace AI in some sort of meaningful way.
So as like from what you're saying, there are a couple of things that come to my mind. The first thing is, why do you think there is a resistance or there is a difficulty in understanding the value of data in certain businesses? What do you think is the block there? Is it more like knowledge, lack of knowledge? Is it more some form of having a bad experience in the past with other technology migrations? What do you think is what is the factor that you think determines most of the times a lack of awareness around the importance of data?
Well, I think for industries that aren't traditionally data-focused industries, so like technology industries who are already thinking technology, right? All they do is live and breathe innovation, and other deeply data-driven industries like financial services and insurance. For everyone else, they're more of a show me type of mentality where they want to see the benefits. They want to see someone gaining something from it that's relevant to their business before they can truly wrap their heads around that this stuff is actually meaningful. So I think that there's still a lot of people that are waiting to see successful use cases. They're waiting to see the benefit quantified in a way that's very similar to how they want to see quantifiable benefit. And there just isn't enough publicized use cases where they can just kind of flip that switch and be open-minded to something that seems very technology forward, and they might not be in a technology industry whatsoever. So I think that the more we have good reports out there that really take an agnostic opinion and showcase that this is something that impacts all industries, the more they'll be open-minded to it. And then as the adoption curve starts to accelerate, I think people will be in a position where it's either I need to start now or I'm really afraid of falling behind. But that isn't something that is common to more traditional industries. Think of manufacturing of automotive parts or supply stores that sell hardware supplies. There are plenty of industries and lines of businesses that just aren't used to thinking about data and technology in this way. And they're just waiting for someone to kind of show them a powerful use case. So that's really part of what we're trying to do, in part, is educate them on, yes, data can impact you too, and capabilities built on data can be a tremendous benefit to really all industries, because it's absolutely the truth.
We have seen something like this before, back in time when in the early 90s, companies became to adopt technology massively to store their data, and over the next 10 to 15 years, then the technology of storing data and making data available for analysis became massively adopted. And at that time, there were also lots of, if you like, companies that were facilitating the process with education, with the consulting, solutions, and things of this sort. I'd like to dwell just a little bit more, because this is a point where the industry has a challenge. Obviously, go and talk to somebody that is waiting for a clear use case, a clear explanation of benefit. It's a challenge. So how do you go about, in a new situation where maybe you do not have exactly the use case that, the example for them, but you have something similar? How do you go about communicating them the value and switching them, let's say, in marketing terms, from being cold to being a little bit more, bit warm about what you're trying to propose?
Yeah, so I think that that's where we still see, again, 8 out of 10 people we're talking to are really AI curious, because they're seeing all the marketing and they're reading the reports, but they haven't quite figured out how to translate to that business. And of those 8, the ones that value the data are the ones that we're going to work with in this way. And I think the most effective way that I've seen to really broker the use cases is really, and has been inspired or borrowed from the design industry, and focused design sprints using things like human-centered design methodologies, lean agile methodologies, to really broker ideas in a starting point very, very quickly. So we have a methodology called the readiness canvas, which was borrowed from a lean canvas, which some of your listeners or viewers may be familiar with. And what we're trying to do is help businesses who do have data and value that data, turn that data into a capability, a really practical, relevant use case of artificial intelligence very, very quickly, and also de-risk any project development. Because as you know, when it comes to AI, for those that are curious, they're just experimenting with AI, what happens is many of those projects hit dead ends or get stuck. So what we're trying to do is spend time with them and really root the use cases in the problems of the business, where we first explore the strategy, then we want to explore the data that backs that strategy. And once we understand those two things, we can really start to whittle down a lot of use cases that make absolutely zero sense for them, that maybe they were excited about, would have ultimately tried and failed against. But then to start to hone in on the list of use cases that are most relevant to their business, that they actually can pull off, that would actually drive business value. So once we've made a list of use cases, we pick the starting point, and then finally really focused on developing a project plan or an engineering plan to take that use case into model development all the way through software engineering, so people can actually use it and drive value from it. And we can do that in a week or two, which is a tremendously fast start for most organizations who are embracing innovative technology for the first time.
So for our audience, again, what you're hearing here is a model, if you like, of what's called in the industry, this is called the complex sales model, so a complex solution model. And basically, Steve, if I get it right, you have a methodology here that basically entails to work together with your customer. So build the solution kind of together, where the customer is providing an input, you process this input and try to come up with a list of potential value solutions, and then with the customer, you filter them out. Can you perhaps dwell around this a little bit more? And I like to understand how this part is essential to move, to the next part, that is basically develop an actual product, or if you like, automate the process inside the corporate.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a tremendous tool to really get stakeholders aligned, really getting people in the room who just have no experience spending a lot of time together. So executive sponsors, system architects, head of data, all these people really need to come together and align in a meaningful way. So what we're trying to do is have them hear each other's perspectives and then ultimately land on a strategy and a goal and a way to measure any AI program, taking into account their perspectives as well as customer perspectives. So that's ultimately the hardest part. But when you can do that, you can really build off something very sustainable. And then step two is to try to understand intimately, where is the data relevant to that strategy? How can we measure that goal? And how can we collect more data if there are data gaps? What are the technology dependencies? How do we bridge those? And ultimately try to find a path for them that they can find today, and then ultimately help them build a better, stronger path for the future by filling in data gaps, whether it be creating within those four walls more of the data they need to pull off an AI use case, or helping them broker data from the outside. How do we bring in data from a partner or data that exists by way of social media, for example, to enrich data sets inside the business that would make the use case more interesting? So once we understand the business and the data, we can start to say, here are the use cases that are in bounds for you. These ones would drive the most value. These ones would be the most effort. And what's that sweet spot where we find something very low hanging fruit that's low effort and drives a lot of value? We select that first, and then we really start to figure out what type of models we want to use against it. What is the data plan to collect and prepare the data to feed that and train that model? And then ultimately, a model is great, but the really hard part about AI is making a model a usable solution that businesses and stakeholders can derive value from. So what is that engineering plan to go from model to execution? And again, if we can do that very, very quickly, we've given people a tremendous starting point.
So once more for our audience, these aspects and what Steve is talking about is so crucial in the adoption of a new product or even a new service. In this case, they're offering a semi-productized service. And it's something that I think it is crucial to understand for anybody that is working with new technology, especially startuppers and the startup. So Steve, as part of what you're saying, is there are two things that piqued my attention in the last question. One is that in your process of getting basically a prioritization on what can be done with machine learning that has business value for that particular enterprise, you have a level of measuring this value. And then the second thing that I also looked at is that you have a way to measure, possibly quantitatively, the outcome. Is there a way that you could illustrate these two different measurement, if you like, approaches, or example? You can give us an example. Visualize better. You measure, prioritization basically and results in the end.
Yeah, the first part is really about measuring the success of the AI strategy and really trying to understand, if we're going to pick a business goal, we want to make sure that we pick a business goal that is ultimately quantifiable. So when we work with businesses, we're working with lines of business, technology owners, engineers, data analysts, and all of them have their own priorities and goals. And those goals ladder up to bigger business priorities that are really all over the map. So when we pick one, we want to pick one that we can measure. Now, for example, a common one is sales forecasting, right? So if we're sales forecasting today, we want to make sure that any AI program will help us forecast on sales just a little bit better the next time, or a lot better, depending on the expectation of the owner, right? So when we're doing some of our propensity models, for example, or trying to help them predict better forecasting from pipeline, we want to take scenario one and then what they're doing today, and then compare it against what any AI program is doing moving forward. So together we decide what that benchmark is. And that's a collaborative effort. So there isn't really any one way to do that. My best advice is just to pick something you can measure, because if you're going to be starting an AI program, you immediately want to show that you have measurable success as a starting point. Beyond that, you can get a lot of enthusiasm and support behind you. And then from there, you can pick a lot of other programs. So for sales forecasting, ultimately, we're just trying to find nominal lift. It might be 10, 15, 25% more accurate. But what we're trying to do is pick an AI, a practical AI use case using a model of machine learning that would ultimately help them do it a little bit better as quickly as possible. And why that's so important, even though the AI can achieve far more over a lot longer period of time, it often requires better infrastructure, more data, more expertise, more technical debt. And that's not a great starting point for most organizations. They want to see success. They want to prove to themselves that they can do this before they really start to invest further and really scale AI programs and multiple AI programs across the organization. So again, we're looking for fast success. We're looking for small gains, but very, very measurable as a starting point.
It just, to go over this topic and kind of, dwell a little bit more on what happens next. So your strategy in basically favoring adoption is trying to find a sweet spot between what can be done quickly and what could be measured, could also have some business value that is relevant. So the next step though is, okay, we got this quick win. If we look back to what we were discussing before, and was that a lot of traditional industries, they're not traditionally used to value data as an asset. And even if they have lots of data, they probably haven't been used that. So now there is, as a next step, there is probably a technology challenge here, which is creating the data infrastructure for machine learning to operate. This is something that we've seen many times. So people err in hiring data scientists. I have witnessed it in a company, something like this. The hiring data scientist, PhD, but then you find out that your data infrastructure and all you need to bring the data in one single place, clean them, making them available to do any sort of meaningful work is not that easy. So how do you go about this second phase, and how do you sort of make people realizing the complexity of what they need, like that they need some enabling work before they can go further?
Yeah, and I think a lot of times we are spending our efforts just focused on data assessment, data generation, data augmentation, technology, looking at technology, finding gaps and dependencies. Ultimately, what we're trying to do first is work within all the constraints and find a practical path forward. Because what we'll do is in parallel is let's find a practical use case, meaning a very narrow use case, build a very point solution, something very specific to the business. And usually, now there's certain people in certain industries and certain spectrum of, let's say, the digital transformation conversation that just aren't going to be ready for AI. And they shouldn't be the start. I mean, you should educate them that that's not a great starting point for them. AI isn't going to be able to touch every business. There's going to be some prerequisite work. However, with even the 10 of 10 businesses I'm using in this fictitious scenario, almost all of them can find some starting point because they have some data. They are using the cloud or can embrace the cloud in some way. And we can find a way to start bringing fast success for them. So we run in parallel, right? We find our fast success and that quantifiable, measurable, practical use case. And in parallel, we've noticed all of these constraints, all of these technology and data dependencies, and we'll work with them in parallel. So we start planting seeds for them for day one as we are working to help them accomplish something in parallel. And then once we have our first use case, we can hopefully continue to fill in those gaps from a technology standpoint, a data standpoint, and then more interesting use cases can be built on top of those further down the road. So it's a nice way that, what does the old proverb say? When's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When's the second best time to plant a tree? Today. So helping them plant that tree today, but also looking for trees that they could essentially pull fruit from immediately. And then we do that simultaneously so we can build them more of a sustainable, scalable foundation over time. Again, this is for more of the people that are in worse shape than others, but a lot of times that's the reality of most businesses.
So I think we have covered a very interesting area, and there would be, several other angles that we could look at. But I'd like to take what we have done so far, and we look at basically how you communicate the value of a solution to a business, with how you basically help these companies to monetize their data assets, and you help them to sort of design a path forward that is a combination of giving them quick fruits and also more strategic thinking and more technology planning for what is going to come next. Now let's reverse this and let's look at you running a startup fundamentally, and you started this startup a year and a half ago. And as any business, the oxygen of the business is generating revenue, selling the service. So let's start to look at how startups that are operating in artificial intelligence, which is, as we said, it's a new area, so it's a new product. What did you identify being the most compelling problems in going to market for a startup trying to do this?
I think the hardest part for an AI services company is knowing where to focus. And something that we're still trying to figure out, where the adoption curve is fairly lumpy. It's lumpy across businesses, industry types, lines of business. But even if you got inside, let's say, insurance, what we're quickly finding out working with insurance companies that there's great discrepancy between the insurance haves when it comes to AI and digital transformation, and very, very large insurance companies that don't even have a single data scientist. And they're not even thinking about cloud technology right now. So knowing where to focus for any AI company is going to be very, very difficult. And you should be constantly having that conversation, trying to find a focus. And usually that focus is found for us by looking for what low-hanging fruit is, which is going to be different to all businesses. It's a combination of who you know or how you can be connected to your first customer. And then once you land that first customer, really trying to build around that competency center. So let's pretend like you had your first customer in retail, but you didn't necessarily think you were coming in focusing on retail. Take that success story with retail and then market that into scaling the retail sector, trying to walk that use case into other retailers or other people within the retail organization that may find benefit from it. We were predominantly growing through our network, our own personal connections, and those people that they can refer us to, which is going to be easier for a services company, maybe not so easy for a less connected product company. So it's going to be a little bit different for everybody. But I think at the end of the day, if you can find the use case that you feel like you drive the most value through, then find the people who have that problem. Sell to the problem and sell your use case to the people that would benefit from it most. And then ultimately, when you find yourself solving a new problem in a new use case that even surprises you, go ahead and focus there as well. And that's been pretty successful for us in trying to build out our success stories as almost a focus.
I'd like to expand a little bit on this, and it's probably, as our time goes to the end, it's probably one of the last questions. And there are two elements here that we discussed. One is, once you find the successful use case, trying to find other people that have that problem, and two, basically opening up, communicating this. How do you really do that? How do you find other people? And when you are, you're starting up, how do you find other people, and how do you start the conversation?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, tactically, the first, and this is just in my nature, probably being a former educator and marketing guy, so I want to build personas. I want to build people and really understand the psychology of the individual buyer, what their problems are, what roles they carry in the organization, who they may be reporting to and who might be reporting to them, and really understand their buying habits, where they like to get their information from, and the different places that they may seek to receive information on how to solve problems. And then really try to be very present in those places, try to communicate to their problems, market yourself in all those places, whether it be magazines or search or communities, tech forums, blogs. So really try to focus on that. And then I also really try to focus on trying to figure out where the research is going that supports our product and our service, and then find the people that really consume that research and then walk our solution to them.
And so for research, I guess you mean the marketing research in that particular
McKinsey reports, Gartner reports, Accenture, all they're publishing in great detail about all the fabulous success of artificial intelligence, and trying to pair your solution with a third-party validation of the problem you solve is very powerful.
So I think that is something that we see pretty often in the industry as spectators. Like often I see, either on LinkedIn or if I go to a conference, I see startup XYZ or company XYZ. Usually it's more company XYZ saying that Gartner said that. And basically validating this important point that third-party validation is important. Now, there is third-party, and I promise this is my last question, is third-party validation important in the opening phase of the conversation with the prospect, or it carries weight as later in the conversation? It's an opening tool, or it's something that can be used also in the closing aspect of the sale?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it helps make a broader point, is that when it comes to artificial intelligence, there's still a lot of educating we have left to do. And to sell our product, we have to be great educators and educate why we exist and the need for our product exists. Now, we can tell them that until we're blue in the face, and maybe they'll buy it, maybe they won't. We might not be very credible. But the research brings credibility. So at the end of the day, when you can educate why you need to exist and go in there and really bring a lot of thought leadership up front. So when you're prospecting, really lean in and bring a lot of interesting perspective and thought leadership out of the gate, validate it with credible research. People will be very responsive to hearing how you solve those problems.
And that is something I think very insightful. Here on this channel, we have covered several topics from science to the strategy to the product, the use cases. But I would argue that the adoption of technology, the ability to communicate its value, the ability to reach out the customer niche or the early adopters is one of the most important, because it determines the life or death of a startup, life or death of that project inside a large corporate. I was personally involved with bringing this type of new project into all companies, and I went through all these steps. Some projects succeeded, some projects didn't succeed. But the ones that succeeded were the ones where we got more stakeholders involved. We were the quickest able to deliver value and so on. So Steve, this is absolutely a great contribution. We're so honored to have you here today, and want to thank you. For our audience, we want to thank you for being here today. It's an honor, privilege to have you here. And if you have suggestions about other content or content around this area that you'd like to see, please comment below. If you have questions, we're happy to answer. Just comment on the video. So Steve, thank you so much.
Thanks, Paolo. It was fun. Come visit us sometime.